Hello and welcome back to my spare room studio. Today I'm going to be colouring with Arrtx Watercolor Pencils. I won this set of 72 colours in a recent giveaway on YouTube by Raquel at Teacups and Art. So thank you again to Raquel for holding the giveaway. I'm going to be colouring in a number of books, but this particular one here is Rhapsody in Hepboss by Kanoko Agusa, and this was also a giveaway that I won with the wonderful Annika at Arrtx Fumbles a few years ago now. So thank you to both of those ladies for giving me the opportunity to work with these things. I wasn't in the market to buy new watercolour pencils because I already have the Faber-Castell Arrrtx Dura pencils. I have Derwent watercolour pencils that are many years old. And I also have the Derwent Inktense, which are not watercolour pencils, but I tend to use them in the same sort of manner. I thought that was more than an adequate amount of water-soluble pencils to be going on with, so I was really pleasantly surprised to win these pencils, and because they are so new to me, I'm going to have a bit of a play with them. I have completed one page, and that is in the Creatures of Ken Matsuda, the Hachette Hero version. There is a video on the channel if you'd like to see me colour that page. But that is all I have done with these pencils so far, so I felt like it was time to have a go in a different book, trying different paper and see what results I can get with them. Most of the time you will see me working with water-soluble pencils or watercolour pencils or the Inktense. Even Neocolor 2s, I do the same thing. I tend to lift the colour from the tip of the pencil or whatever the medium is, and I apply that to either damp paper or I apply it straight to dry paper. And I do that because in the past I've never really got great results by working directly onto the paper and then dissolving or activating the pencils. I usually end up with some sort of pencil strokes, or I feel like it doesn't dissolve properly, or I just don't like the overall look that I've been creating. So that's why I reverted to this method, because I found by lifting the colour from the pencil tip it was always dissolved, and I never ended up with those weird pencil strokes or areas that looked like they weren't activated correctly. With these pencils being new to me, I thought it's a perfect time to play with them. Sometimes when you have your art supplies for a long time, you get into a method of working with them or a preferred working style, and you forget to experiment and have a play with them. So when you get something new, it is the perfect time to experiment, play and push the boundaries to see what that new art supply can do for you. So that's what I thought I would do with this page and a couple of other books, to test them on the paper and also see how they work. So I've been working much more lightly, a very, very pale colour. In fact, sometimes the colours might be so pale you won't see me applying them. But working with very, very light layers on the paper and then activating gives me much more of the result I'm looking for. Now you can work with these pencils in a number of ways, and it will all come down to your personal preference again, to what sort of look you like to create. With water-soluble mediums, I tend to have in the back of my mind that I'm always trying to mimic a watercolour look. And to me, a watercolour look is light and transparent and airy, and allows the white of the paper to come through and just have a sense of lightness and translucency about them. You don't have to work with watercolours that way, of course. You can do some very deeply saturated colour with watercolour paints. But this is just my thinking, what I've come to over many years of painting with watercolour. That has become my preference to what I think watercolour should look like. So when I'm stating these facts, I'm really just stating my own opinion, and I know that other people are going to have other opinions. So when it comes to water-soluble pencils, where I've been struggling with them is that I've been wanting it to look like a watercolour painting. But the more that I think about it, the more unrealistic that is, because these are not watercolour. They are water-soluble pencils, and they can create a very similar look to a watercolour, but they're not watercolours. You know, watercolours are paints in their own right. These are pencils, they're water-soluble pencils, but they're not the same thing. So in my own mind, I've been trying to maybe achieve an impossible result. I think I get pretty close to a watercolour look, but they really aren't like a true watercolour. So, having said that, why does that matter? It matters because it frees me up now to think about these pencils in a different way. It's going to free me up to think about working with them in a much more opaque manner. It's going to let me create more textures and effects with them and not be so reliant on trying to achieve that watercolour look. However, this page in particular, I want to keep light and airy. This is my first little test, and I want to see if I can actually achieve a light, airy look with working directly on the paper. And the answer is yes. I think what you can see here, you know, I can keep continuing to build the colour up, but I can also leave it like light and airy and very pastel-like as it is at this stage, and that's perfectly acceptable. I think it's good to have different, how shall I put this, strings to your bow, different looks that you can achieve with your colouring, and then you don't get into a rut because you're constantly experimenting, trying new things and adapting and learning. So while I waited for some of that page to dry, I went on to this one. So I've been switching back and forward between a number of books and working on them all at the same time. As it gets too wet, I put it aside and then I grab another book back out and continue working on that. So you can see that I have no bleed through on this page at this stage. This is Camilla Derico's Flights of Fancy colouring book. And I thought about these little birds here as being budgerigars, but I wasn't actually trying to create a realistic look. And I'm actually just using pretty much the colours that I had out for the Kanoko Agusa page. So whilst that page is very pale and transparent, this page I'm working in a very different way just to see what the pencils can create on a different style of illustration. So what I've done there is I have dampened the page with water, and I am now colouring directly onto that wet paper. Now I know you're going to hear so many people say, do not work on wet paper, and I understand why, because it's very easy to damage the paper. However, this pencil is not sharp, it's got a blunt edge on it, and I found that if I am very careful and using that blunt edge, not a sharp point, I can work on this paper and it's not damaging it. So what I have noticed by working this way, and I have done it in the past with my other watercolour pencils and so on, and I don't use it very often, just occasionally I tend to like to get this really deep saturated look with them. But as you're working on the wet paper, the pigment seems to, well, with these particular pencils, the Arrtx Watercolor Pencils, it seemed to sit on the surface and skate around on the surface. Now this paper does cope very well with lots of water, and I never really have a lot of trouble with the paper in Camilla Derico books anyway. But even working in this manner with the pencil directly onto wet paper, that initial layer of pencil is just skating around on the top. It's not really being absorbed by the paper, and it gets kind of, for want of a better description, it gets a bit goopy. So it's thick and it's moving around and the pencil's pushing it around on the surface, and it's not really being absorbed by the paper. So that could mean that it's the paper that's doing that. It could mean that the composition of that pencil lead, whatever they've made it up with, it could either be one or the other or a combination of both. So I'm only going to know that if I keep experimenting with this method on other books and other paper. So, pardon me, I can't always give you definitive answers, but what I can give you is some examples of how to play, examples of how to experiment, and how to go with the flow and allow yourself to learn different things and try different things without ever really knowing what the result is going to be. I can tell you the results that I get. What you experience in your book on the paper you have with the pencils that you own may be different. But what I'm hoping to do when I share these videos with you is to give you that confidence, a few ideas of how to let yourself relax and let go of the preconceived ideas of how you want the page to end, and just allow yourself to experiment and play. And you never really know what's going to happen when you do that, but that's when you get those nice, happy accidents and surprises, when serendipity happens and you get a result that you're not expecting but you really like. Along with that, you're going to have failures, but you're going to have wins. So this page has a number of different ways to use the pencils used on it, and if I have a preference, I would still prefer to attempt that watercolour look. I just feel like it is a much more pleasant result to look at. And the other way of working with the pencil on wet paper has its merits for different types of illustration or different types of paper perhaps. If you've got a more of a toothy paper, then that pencil may actually work a little bit differently and grab on to the paper a bit better than it did in this book. So, you know, once again, it's really all about having that willingness to adapt with whatever happens, go with the flow, try different things until you hit on something that you really like. But start out with an open mind. Don't have too many preconceived ideas of what it's going to look like, and then hopefully just accept what happens and learn from that. Whether you like it or you don't, there's going to be something that you can learn from it. In the next book that I am going to share with you, you will see that I get a slightly different result with these pencils again. So it very much does come down to the paper and paper quality as to the result you will get. So here is progress on this particular page out of Rhapsody in Hepboss, and that is how it looks from a distance. I wanted to keep this page rather pastel, pale colours, really light, try not to get too heavy with it. So I probably won't do a lot more to this. There probably could be plenty done with it, but for a test page, I think it's okay. So I just thought I'd show you close up some of the details of, just how those pencils have worked. If you're considering buying the Arrtx Watercolor Pencil, they might be useful to show you just what is capable with the pencil. Okay, so that's the Arrtx Watercolor Pencil, and then I have used a little bit of the Langro gel pen in the highlight set. This is the gold, and I've used a little bit of gold around on the edges of those stamps. Next, I'd like to show you how this page is going. This is the Flights of Fancy by Camilla Derico. Now, I don't know if I'm going to do any more to this. It really is a test piece, but it is almost complete, so I probably will, do a little bit extra on the hair and finish off these birds and so on. But I thought you might like to see some of the close-up details. So where I did the demonstration of putting the very heavy pencil on here, I really didn't like it. It was too dark, too heavy. So I've actually tried lifting some of it off, diluting it with water and then lifting it off with a clean brush. And you can see that that has worked to a certain extent as well. So, pardon me, they're not, this picture is not particularly what I would say is watercolour-like effects. Although there are some areas here where it, is a little bit more washy, a little bit more transparent than others. That's the way that I've coloured it. You can see I've got some nice smudges there. This here was actually trying out the Languo gel pen and diluting it just to see what that would do. And that is how that page looks so far. So I may do a little bit more on this and just finish it off. Seeing as it's got to this point, I may as well make a go of it. So you will see that in my completed pages at the end of June. The next book that I've been working in is this one called Urban Anna Colouring Book. And it is enchanting shop fronts from around the world. I quite like the paper in this one. It's really different. Don't know how to compare it to anything because it's not like any other book that I've got. But the book does have the coloured original artwork on the left. And on the right hand side, we've got the drawing in a nice grey ink. It's not black. So you can play around with replicating that watercolour look, and then if you want to darken those lines up you can later, but I think that's a nice touch. And before I get into showing you what I've been doing, I thought I'd share with you this back page here that has some colour palettes, because I would like to read this out to you. Don't worry if you don't have a big set of watercolours. You can mix almost every shade with just the primary colours red, blue and yellow. By combining your watercolours, you'll create a whole new colour palette that will help you bring the shop fronts in this book to life. Below you can see how many shades you can mix with just a few colours. Imagine what you can achieve if you just add a dash of black. Now I would add to that too that if you're not so worried about having a transparent or translucent effect, if you added a little bit of white to these colours, you've got yourself a set of pastels. So Madder Lake red and ultramarine mixed together can come up with that selection of colour. Blue and lemon yellow comes up with that selection, and cadmium yellow and scarlet, that selection. But you can take that even further and you can take colours from there and mix them here, and you will start to create some browns. Or, any of these colours, if you mix them together, you will end up getting brown. Now, if you do it carefully, you'll get some really nice browns. If you do it badly, you'll get mud. So that's just to highlight to you that from 6 colours, that is potentially what you can make. So that's where watercolour paints are a little bit different from watercolour pencils, because not all watercolour pencils are going to layer up and create such beautiful colours either. So, that's sort of what I was touching on, expecting something that is not a watercolour to behave like a watercolour is a little bit crazy, really. The watercolour pencils have got pigments and binders, so it all comes down to what they've used to create the pencil. And the cheaper they are, the more binders they have. The more expensive they are, the more pigment they'll have. So I just thought I'd share with you that I've been playing with this particular page here. Now, I did this in front of the television of an evening, and the lighting wasn't great. So artificial light obviously is going to change your perception of colours, as is the lighting I've got here for this video is probably going to alter the perception of the colours quite a bit as well. But I just thought I'd show you a little bit of these pencils in this particular book. Now, the paper is not thick. It's a bit of an off-white colour. It's not that heavy at all. But there's something about it that's very reminiscent of a sketchbook paper. So it's not cartridge paper, but it's different. I can't really describe it, can't really explain it. Certainly not watercolor paper. So I've got a paper towel here ready, and I've got my water brush, and I'm going to show you a little bit of what I've been doing here. So I'm going to expand on this background here a little bit, darken that up, because I've got sort of the basic color down, but it's much too bright if I want to match this side. And of course you don't have to match that side, but I am going to try and do it for this purpose. And I want to show you here too that the reproduction of this page shows all of the texture of the watercolor paper. Now the artist hasn't created that texture, that is the watercolor paper with the watercolor paint on it. So therefore we can never fully replicate this look, because this is not watercolor paper. So I'm never going to be able to create all of those little effects unless I sit here and painstakingly try to copy that with coloured pencil. And I could probably, if I had the patience and the wherewithal to do that, but personally I do not. So I just wanted to point that out, because I think sometimes people have unrealistic expectations of what they're going to achieve with a colouring book, when it's just not possible to do that with the colouring book. So here you can see I'm working by picking up the colour from the tip of the pencil again, and I'm applying that to dry paper because I don't want to saturate this paper too much. I don't know what it's capable of. And this being my first picture in the book, I was attempting to create as close a look as the original as I can without bleed through and cockling the paper and all that sort of thing. So that's why I've chosen to do things the way that I have. So to begin with, I used the grey here, AW723, and now I'm going over it with the black. Now 723, let me just grab my colour sheet here. 723 is gunmetal grey, and I'm using 799, which is black. Now I want to preserve some of this light colour up here like the other page has got. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly dampen that area, very, very lightly, with clean water. And can you see already how that colour has travelled up there? And so what I thought I might do is just use a little bit of black to darken it up, because that grey wasn't dark enough colour. And I'm going to just gently encourage that to travel up there to the damp bit, and I'm going to let it do its own thing and bleed on its own. Now if this was watercolour paper, I would get some lovely blending and blooming like this area here, but as this is not, I'm not going to be able to achieve that same result. I might possibly get close to it, but I won't achieve the same result. So I'm going to leave that like that. And then what I might do, just because I'm here with you guys and playing, just to show you that, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I don't know how this is going to react, but I've got stuff everywhere here. This one is called Light Apricot Yellow, and I'm going to lift a little bit of colour from that tip, and I'm going to just touch it into this damp paper, and if it blends into that murky black, then it will, and we'll let it do its own thing and see what happens. But just very lightly touching that in and see what happens. Okay, so that's how I've created this look so far, by lifting the colour from the pencil tip. And the reason I chose to do it that way was that I didn't think that this particular paper will be particularly good for soaking it, I don't think. So I'm going to use, let's have a look here. I might use turquoise if I can find it. I have to say that whilst the packaging for these Arrtx pencils is really nice, and the concept of having it, you know, standing up and so on is nice, putting the pencils back in there is a bit of a pain. So before I get too involved, let me just put a couple of sheets of paper there, just in case I make a boo-boo and it bleeds everywhere. So now what I'm going to do, I've got turquoise here, and this is very very in your face green, and it's very yellow. Well, I have got a bit of yellow green in there as well, but I'm going to use this turquoise now to tone things down a little bit for the shadows. So this is a demonstration in using watercolor pencils. The picture on the left has been painted with watercolor paints. A whole different kettle of fish. And if I was to copy that page using paints on this side, which I may do on another page, I'll get the Genzo Tambi paints or some watercolor paints out and give it a go. I'd have much more opportunity to play with my colors, mixing them and so on, trying to match the correct tone so that it looks more like the version on the left side. But because I'm using the pencils, and layering the watercolor pencils isn't the same as mixing individual colors on a palette and working from, you know, some mixed colors. It's not the same thing. So I'm not going to get exactly the same look out of this. I'm going to tone the door down, and I may possibly have to work over that and tone down the yellowness that's in there. So please bear in mind the original colours were chosen under artificial light, and today I'm actually sitting in front of a window with natural light, and it's a cloudy day. It's overcast, the sun keeps coming and going, and it's quite a grey day. But lighting conditions will greatly change your colour perception. And also different lighting conditions will affect, you know, how things look quite a bit. And they say that natural light is the best light to paint by. And I know we're not colouring, but I'm explaining watercolour type techniques. So that is why I'm referring back to art practices. Now you can see I just touched that area there, and of course all of that black is now flooding down there. That's what happens when you work with water-based things. But that's okay, I'll work with it. That will actually help to describe a bit of a shadow down there as well and change the colour of that. So you can obviously in a colouring book approach things however you'd like to. If you were at art school and learning the ways of watercolour with a teacher, if they were a purist and wanted you to create watercolour in the traditional way. You know, there'd be a set way that they would want you to work. And you can see now here I've got all this cauliflower effect happening. So the water is actually separating some of this colour here, and I wasn't really expecting that from the pencils, but that's the unpredictability of working with water. It doesn't always work exactly how you think it's going to, but so as it dries, it changes, and that's why, you know, never get too upset if you're colouring with watercolour or water-based mediums, and you know, initially you think it's terrible. Just let it dry and come back and assess it again later when you've given it a chance to dry, because it will continue to keep changing. So what I'll do here is I'll have a little go at trying to create this. I'm not very hopeful that I will be able to create it, but I'll give it a go. So I don't think that yellow I've got there is the right sort of yellow. We'll try another one. So what I'm going to do is wet the paper very, very lightly first. Try not to get too close to that door because I have actually just painted that. And what I find with watercolour pencils is that inevitably you get colours that do not behave like any other colour in the pack. And some will bleed really easily, and some will not bleed in a way that you want them to at all. And again, I put that down to it's the binders that are in the pencil, because you don't have all of that with watercolour paints. Although saying that, let's take that out of there, we don't actually really want the yellow there. Different pigments do behave differently. So if you've ever attempted some sort of watercolour and been totally despondent because you couldn't get the hang of it in just, you know, a couple of goes, you know, no, people can study watercolour for years to master watercolour. And I don't say that to scare you and put you off. I say it because, you know, go into it with realistic expectations, because it really is fun. Watercolour, if you've got the time to sit with the brushes and paint and just really immerse yourself into it, it's great. It's really nice to work with watercolour. Right, to try and get some of that blooming effect going here, I'm going to put a bit more water in there like that, and hopefully encourage some of this black to come down. So I am doing that quite slowly. If I was here on my own, I'd probably zip along a little bit faster, depending on what my mood is, because some days I really do like to take my time over messing around with watercolour paints and water and brushes and so on. And then just for good measure, I'm going to put a little bit of sort of terracotta colour here. It's brick red. And I'm just going to put a little bit of that in there. and we'll let that do its thing. And I'm just going to put a little bit of that over the table here because the brown that I had there was a little bit too cool, and I had a feeling it would be. I didn't think that I had the correct colour in the set, so that's a little bit of showing you how to, you know, overlay colours to create the colour that you really want. And what I might do up here, because this is the wrong colour completely, I'm just going to have a go. I didn't attempt this way to start with because the paper almost has a slippery feel to it, like it's coated. And I just didn't think that the pencil was going to grab too well to it, and I feel like that's the case. That hasn't felt nice at all. So I'm going back to doing this, lifting from the pencil, but I'm trying to keep it away from the page so I don't flick it onto the page by accident. So given that it's the first page in the book and a little demo for you guys, I would like to try and keep it, you know, reasonably close to the original and show you just a little bit about, you know, how you can try and match something that somebody has done with watercolour with a budget priced set of watercolour pencil. So it's again back into that subject again of you'll be able to get close, but whether you'll be able to replicate it exactly, you know, I'm not too sure. So I've changed the colours down here quite a bit because that's what I've got here in this set. So that's how I've created that look so far. So I don't know how many people have got this particular book. I don't see it coloured in too often. Yeah, the texture of the pencil over that doesn't feel like it's really grabbing it. It's sort of skating over it a little bit. Yeah, I haven't really seen people colour in this on YouTube or Instagram too much, but to be fair, I haven't really looked for it either, so I should do a specific search for it and see if I can find some examples from it. But just from this very quick play, I have enjoyed it so far, and the illustration style is very appealing to me. I picked it up when I saw it because you know, well, you may know if you've watched the channel that I do have an interest in drawing myself, and the sketchbook style, you know, drawing on this side to colour just seemed like a perfect example to have a go at practicing with architecture and buildings and so on, because that's not my usual subject either. I don't really profess to be very proficient at buildings. But I thought even if I never got around to painting in this book or colouring in this book, I really enjoyed sitting and looking through the images. And it gave me some really good reference and ideas for how to approach drawing architecture in my sketchbook, so one day I may get around to taking my sketchbook out somewhere and having a go. I haven't really been game to do it to this point in time. As I mentioned, architecture isn't really a subject that I have been that interested in for my art. I was much more focused on people. People, animals and flowers were pretty much what I used to try and represent. So you can see that these colours are quite light. So it will require some building up of the colour. And possibly further down the track, I don't know whether I'll do it with this page, but maybe a little bit of coloured pencil might be good. But, you know, for the first attempt, I wanted to try and replicate this look. So in the window here, it looks like there's some sort of a chalkboard, or the door. So I'm going to use some black, and then I can use a white gel pen at a later stage to try and represent some writing on there. Sorry if you can hear my tummy growling and grumbling, but I've eaten not too long ago and it seems to be protesting for some reason. And I've got quite a big brush here, so I'm going to have to transfer over to a smaller brush. So, you know, something that's got a really nice point on it, maybe. A very small one. And this particular water brush that I'm using, because I was playing in those other books, I had actually used quite an old, slightly frayed brush here, so this way of working is quite alien to me. Usually I like to slop lots of water on, you know, splash paint about, splash water about, work a lot more loosely. But because I'm trying to replicate this picture, I'm working very carefully and slowly, and it's quite small scale. So even with the correct brush, this is quite small scale, all of these little details on the shelf here, all the books and things. So it doesn't call for, you know, sloshing too much water about, because it will just bleed past the lines and make a bit of a mess, and it certainly won't end up looking like this one here if I put too much water on it, because that one hasn't been created with lots of water. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I will show you this one as well in the completed pages at the end of the month. If you would like me to work in this book from start to finish on an image, please do let me know, and let me know what media you would like me to use, whether it's watercolour or whether you want to see it done with some other medium. Although bearing in mind, I don't know how well pencils will work on this paper, but let me know if you'd like to see anything like that. And also let me know whether you have any questions about the Arrtx watercolor pencils. Again, I'm certainly not telling you to rush out and buy them if you've already got lots of watercolor pencils, but if you are in the market for them, you know, if you're in the market for a watercolor pencil because you don't own any, they are good for starters, for beginners. 72 isn't a huge colour range, but in theory you could potentially mix some new colours up yourself if you follow some colour theory. So 72 colours is certainly not a bad start. Yeah, I mean, they're a serviceable pencil for sure. They will get you started if you've never used a watercolour pencil before. Okay, so you can see that I still have a lot more darkening up to do if I'm going to get to the intensity of that page, and working up, slowly. But please do let me know if there is anything you would like to see me do. And I'll just show you, it's not dry yet, but I'll just show you here how that is all starting to bleed into each other there. And I'll show you how it has started to dry around the light there. So even though these are just watercolour pencils, it's not doing too bad a job really. And again, that is right under our nose when you see it further away. If you saw that in a book without that next to it, I think it's quite serviceable, quite acceptable. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for joining me again. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sorry about these videos, being pieced together and a bit disjointed, but sometimes, you think of things as you're doing different pages, not necessarily all in that one page, but hopefully there's something there that is of use to you. So enjoy your colouring until I see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye now.